Hello, and welcome to Math Extra, the show that puts you on the right path in math. I'm Miss Green, back on the set and ready to teach. But first, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to stay in touch with your teachers. I need you to keep working on those school assignments. And I need you to get ready to learn. Okay, so this is how it works on Math Extra. We'll start with a 6th grade lesson. I'll teach that, followed by a 7th grade lesson, taught by Mr. Leischner. And finally, an 8th grade lesson, taught by Mr. O'Neill. Let's get started. 6th graders, are you ready? Because we're ready to do the math on Math Extra. All right, 6th graders, today's show is about dividing fractions. We'll learn how to multiply by the reciprocal. We'll also learn how to divide fractions using models as well as word problems. So let's get started. Our first problem is 4/5 divided by 1/4. The first thing that we're going to do is use our models that we already have. If you don't have a model, you can always use graphing paper. Graphing paper allows you to stay neat and organized. We have 4/5. On our first module, what we're going to do is shade in 4/5. 2, 3, and 4. All right. Remember, this one represents 4/5. Now let's go ahead and shade in 1/4 on our other model. Shading in 1/4 on this model, we're going to shade in horizontally, because if we shade in vertically, it'll actually be 1/5 and not 1/4. So let's make sure we've shaded in correctly. For this one, for the first model, we have 4/5. We've shaded in 4 out of the 5 blocks. In the second model, we have 1/4. We've shaded in 1 out of the 4. This is the time that we're going to slow it down and look at the second model. What we're going to do is ask ourselves, how many parts make up 1/4? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 parts make up 1/4. That also means 5 will also be our denominator. The next thing that we need to figure out is how many groups of 5 are in 4/5. Let's use a different color for that so we can stay nice and organized. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. That is 1. We have more groups that we can also circle. Let's do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, when we are creating our groups, we also need to remember we're creating our whole number. So far, we have 2 as our whole number. Let's see if we can create another group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Let's put it all together. We have 5 as our denominator. We've made 3 whole groups. And we have a remainder of 1 left over, which is our numerator. Our final answer is 3 1/5. We've used that using our area model. We can also multiply by the reciprocal just to double check our answer. So again, we have 4/5 divided by 1/4, which is multiplying by the reciprocal. 4/5 times 4/1. And what we're going to do here is just multiply straight across. We have 4 times 4, which is 16. 5 times 1, which is 5. Remember, this is an improper fraction. We always want to turn our improper fractions into mixed numbers. Remember, how do you turn improper fractions into mixed numbers? You always keep the denominator. Let's see. Now we need to figure out what whole number will get us as close as possible to 16. 5 times 3 is 15, and we have a remainder of 1. That's how you can double check your answer. All right, let's try another one. Now we have 3/4 divided by 1/2. We need to figure out how many halves go into 3/4. Let's go ahead and just multiply it by the reciprocal. We have 3/4 times 2/1. And we can double check ourselves using the model. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 1 is 4. We can either reduce it now or we can reduce it later. Remember, 6/4 is an improper fraction. We need to turn our improper fractions into mixed numbers. The denominator will always stay the same. Now we need to figure out what whole number can we multiply by the denominator to get as close as possible to our numerator, which is 6. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. Our answer is 1 2/4, which is also equivalent to 1 1/2. All right, now let's use our model to double check ourselves. So, remember, whenever you're using your model, you're actually making your squares based off of the denominator. Our denominators are 4 and 2. So the model that you make on your graphing paper, remember, you can always ask your teacher for graphing paper. It's your right to ask for graphing paper. We have 4 and 2. That means our models need to either be a 4x2 or a 2x4. It's the exact same depending on how you change your paper. So for this, we're making it a 2x4. It has 4 columns and 2 rows. So let's go ahead and represent 3/4, or 3/4. Shading that in. So this model represents 3 squares are shaded in out of 4. Now let's go ahead and represent 1/2. And for me, I feel like it's easier just to go all the way across. Now at this point, we need to figure out how many halves are in groups of 4, or how many halves do we have, which is 4. Now, how many groups of 4 are we able to make in 3/4? So remember, if we're talking about groups, 4 will be our denominator. Now remember, we need to figure out how many groups of 4 are in 3/4. Since we're talking about groups of 4, remember the groups that we're actually talking about will be in our denominator, okay? So now we're finished with this last model. Now we need to figure out the top model. This top model will give us our numerator as well as our whole number, okay? I'll use a different color just so you can clearly see it. We have one group of 4. That one group represents our whole number. Our whole number will be 1. The remainder is always the numerator. You have to remember that. The remainder is the numerator. We have 2 left over. 1, 2. 1 2/4 is equivalent to 1 1/2. Remember, we always need to reduce. 2/4 reduced to 1/2. Which makes these 2 answers equivalent. So just to review it all, we've multiplied first by the reciprocal, and just to check our answer, we use our area model using our denominators to make sure that we have the correct columns and rows. So let's take a look at this next problem. We can create a model as well as just work out the problem. I prefer to just work out the problem because as you get more and more into your math, your numbers will become larger. That means the models will become more problematic to create. So the first thing that we need to do is turn our mixed number into an improper fraction. Our denominator stays the same. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And let's go ahead and rewrite everything over so we can stay nice and neat. Now what we're going to do is multiply by the reciprocal. Remember, dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. Sixth graders, this should be a review for you. Now we have 5 halves times 2 over 1. And what we're going to do is multiply straight across. 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 1 is 2. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. Your answer is 5. In the event you're not given graphing paper, you can always create your own models. So now in this problem, let's combine what we know about fractions as well as what we know about geometry. The perimeter of an equilateral triangle is 19.5 feet. What is the length of one of the sides of the triangle? So think about it this way. We have an equilateral triangle. All sides are equal. Now we can say this is x, x, and x. We also know if we add up all the sides, which is the perimeter, it's going to be 19.5. We have 3x equals 19 and 1/2. Remember, we need to get rid of this x by dividing by 3. Or excuse me, get rid of the 3 by dividing by 3. Now we have x equals 9 and 19.5 divided by 3. Remember what we said about mixed numbers, we need to turn them into improper fractions before we do anything. We're going to keep our denominator, which is 2. 19 times 2 is 38, and 38 plus 1 is 39. And then we're going to divide that by 3 over 1. Next, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. We have 39 divided by 2 times 1 over 3. At this point, what we're going to do is just multiply straight across. We have 39, because 39 times 1 is 39, and 2 times 3 is 6. What we can do here is turn our improper fraction into a mixed number. Now we need to turn our improper fraction into a mixed number. We're going to keep the denominator. 6 times 6 is 36. That's the closest we can get to 39 without going over. And then 3 will be our numerator. That's what's going to be remaining. From here, we do need to simplify our 3 6, which equals 1/2. Our final answer is 6 and 1/2. All right, sixth graders. Today we reviewed dividing fractions. Remember our concepts, multiplying by the reciprocal, and when in doubt, just draw an area model based on the denominators. Remember, those columns and rows will be depending on what your denominators are. Also, don't be scared with fractions. Fractions will be everywhere we are in everything we do. And today, we learned how to divide. Build your skills. That's what we do on Math Extra. And one way we do that is by answering a question from our caller of the day. Hello, and welcome to Math Extra.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good.
Good. What's your name?
Jeremy Nixon.
Hi, Jeremy. What school do you go to?
Northeast Middle School.
Northeast. Okay. What is your question?
How do you solve a problem using an aerial model?
Perfect. We just did that. I'd love to review that with you. Okay. Let's use the example 2 and 1/2 divided by 1/2. If you don't have graphing paper, you can just draw it on your own. Remember, we're using the denominators, or in this case, it's very simple since we have a whole number, which is 2, and then we're working with halves. All right, so let's draw our whole number. So this is our 1, and this is our 2. Remember, we have a half that we also need to account for. Remember, we're working with our first fraction, which is 2 1/2. So we already drew our 2's, which is our whole number, and now we are drawing our half. 2 1/2 is represented by our first area model. Now we need to draw our rulers using the same models. Now at this point, we're using our second model as like a ruler. And we're putting them in halves since it is a half. The question is, how many halves are in 2 1/2? So Jeremy, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this counts for a half, this is a half, this is a half, and so is this. At this point, we just need to figure out how many halves are in 2 1/2. So let's use a different color. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that means 2 1/2 divided by 1/2 equals 5. How do you feel about that?
Good. Thanks.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you for calling. Thank you for spending time with us today. Just remember, school has not ended. Let's make sure we end strong, we study our math, and we do the right thing. I'll see you soon.